Scott, great to have you back as we celebrate Voodoo Lounge turning 30 this year. How are you?
Feeling old now that you say that. Thank you for having me.
It just flew by, didn't it? So to kick things off, now 30 years later, do you think Voodoo Lounge still holds up? How do you feel about the album today?
I think that I feel a little bit fragmented about it. I think that about half of it is great, and another half of it is good.
Mm.
So if you want to average great to good, you get really good. So I do think it is a really good album that, for the most part, it holds up.
Mm-hmm.
30
And
years later.
I think you're touching on something that a lot of people like to poke at about this album, which is it's just too long.
Yeah.
Because on a vinyl setting, it's a double album.
Yep.
And on a CD, it was just one CD. So I think it suffered from that classic '90s CD bloat.
We've got the time, so we might as well fill it. And then I think there was, even on their end, there was some indecision that ultimately, as is their wont, they just decided very quickly what to put on there. And in a VH1 special, when they're rehearsing at RFK Stadium in Washington, and Dan Aykroyd was the host. I don't know if you ever remember.
Mm-hmm.
That's all on YouTube. But Keith is talking about how it would have been murder to try to decide, because they wrote a ton of material for this album. And Keith's like, well, let's just throw on the 15 we got ready. And I think ultimately that's kind of what you get. It's like they threw on the 15 they had ready. Most of them were really good, but some of them you're like, 12 tracks would have been fine. A Steel Wheels length album would have been perfectly fine.
Starting off with the album, I mean, I think the first three songs off the album is some of the strongest, at least in terms of impact, sound-wise and feel-wise, that they've had in a very long time up to that point. And I think it's quite a statement, those first songs. Love is Strong, You Got Me Rocking, and Sparks Will Fly.
And everything was revolving around Charlie.
Yep.
He started all three of those songs.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than have the Keith intro, which was like the customary thing. And there were good Keith riffs in those songs, but Charlie kicked off all three of them in different ways. But it was all about Charlie, and specifically Charlie's snare. And then we learned later how involved he was in getting the drum sound. Obviously, Don was into that. But take nothing away from Chris Kimsey, who got to the producer credit on Steel Wheels, because I think Charlie's drums sounded terrific on Steel Wheels as well. But I think this post-breakup Stones that we got, even though it was not an official breakup, the great thing we got out of it was a better sounding Charlie, the greatest sounding Charlie we had gotten to that point. And so that's when I think of Voodoo Lounge, the first thing that comes to mind for me is Charlie.
Yeah,
and how alive he sounds.
Absolutely. No, I agree. And that's you can't not listen to those first songs and not be moved by that. And a lot of people, I've read people comment that they're confusing that big drum sound as like a continuation of the '80s big drum sound, and not realizing that they actually went with a very natural method to get a big sound.
Just a room, it's a good room sound.
In the stairwell.
Just a lot of air, and it wasn't just air. You can have just the room sound without the mic on the drums themselves. They can sound bad in a different way if it's just the room. It's the blend of the mic on the drums and the cymbals and the rooms, and blending that to get what ultimately we hear. And they did even something like Moon Is Up, which was a really unusual percussion. He was just banging on a trash can.
Mm-hmm.
Or a rubbish bin, as they call it. You remember those little, in the personnel credits, that he was credited with playing the mystery drum?
Yeah, right.
And I think on You Got Me Rockin', Keith is credited with mystery guitar.
Right.
Which was a dobro, I think.
Dobro played with a stick.
Yeah.
Isn't that weird?
So they were really taking time to write a lot and then write different stuff. Mick said in promotional interviews that they really wanted to keep the things that were unusual, and that in prior recording sessions they would have been like, nobody's going to like it. Let's just table that for now.
Mm-hmm.
But let's keep those. Let's finish those. And I think Moon is Up is an example of something they probably would have been like, this is interesting, but what is this?
Right.
And the fact that they kept it, and put Ronnie Wood on a pedal steel through a wah.
Through a Mutron, apparently.
Is that what that?
Yeah, Mutron. So I don't know that pedal, but it's an effect that I don't know what it does. But that's what I thought. I thought it was a wah at first as well.
Okay. See, I learned something every day. Has that ever been done before?
No.
A pedal steel going through an effect? I have no idea, but
yeah,
they had certainly not done anything like that before.
No, not at all.
On a Leslie, which not unusual, but on the whole track, that track blows me away to this day.
Yeah, it's definitely their moment of experimentation on the album, which I always welcome, when it comes to the Stones. And to boot, it's Mick singing. The vocal mic, a proper vocal mic, is nearby while he's also singing into his harmonica bullet mic.
Yeah.
So it's a combo between those two mics, giving a very unique effect to his vocal as well, which is so cool. The whole track is just unusual and just like, what is going on here? And the fact that the Stones are doing it, it's a cherry on top.
Yeah, and they brought in a few more outside contributions that they didn't really get on Steel Wheels. Steel Wheels was so compressed. They started writing it in January, February, and then they're recording it in April, which we now have footage of in Montserrat.
Mm-hmm.
And then the thing is out in August. So it was really fast, tight turnaround because they wanted to get writing, recording, tour done in a year, which they did. So I think this going into Voodoo Lounge is like, let's be a little bit more expansive. And let's give ourselves some more time to write and experiment. And I think we only got the tip of the iceberg.
It's so funny because as a youngster listening to this, I didn't come across it when it was brand new, but just a few years old when I first heard it. And to me, Voodoo Lounge was their hard, like heavy metal album to me. It was so heavy and aggressive, mainly because of the first three songs. They really packed a statement. And a part of me still feels that way, even though I do think it's a much more textured album. And I'm forcing myself to accept it for its length and try to appreciate all the different things there, because there are some things that are unexpected, like New Faces. I had the longest time wrestling with that song. I didn't think I first of all, I just don't like the harpsichord in general.
I love that song. I absolutely love that song.
And I've recently come around to appreciate it. And it's an unusual track that you don't expect, just considering the first three songs are such a impactful, rock vibe. But New Faces is very special.
I think it's I love Mick's lyric in it. Writing from an older person's perspective. You're wondering who this slip of a youth who's getting all the attention, who could that be? And I like the harpsichord.
Yeah, it's beautiful actually. In the song,
kind of like a Brian Jones, but it's interesting. You are feel like it's a hard and aggressive production, whereas I feel sort of the opposite. Like it started out that way, and then it sort of flags, and then it actually gets kind of toothless. I'm thinking like Sucking the Jugular and Brand New Car. Those sound flat to me, production wise. But I'm coming at it from, again, this 5-year gap when they actually kept busy. They had, the Flashpoint live album came out in spring of 91. We got High Wire, so it's a couple new tracks, and then the Live at the Max, which was really innovative. And I had to travel to Baltimore to see it. This is about a 2.5-hour drive, but my parents took me, God bless them.
Nice.
And so the Inner Harbor, the Maryland Science Center. And then you get Mick doing Free Jack. Did you ever see that?
I've seen clips, and that's all I want to see.
Let me say, it came out in January of 92. And if you know anything about the movie industry, the movies that come out in January are the Dogs. It's like,
Oh,
it's not the summer blockbuster period begins in like Memorial Day throughout the summer. And then fall, winter, you get the really good prestige movies that they're going to pitch to the Academy for the Academy Awards. And then January, it's like, what do we have left that needs to come out? That's what Free Jack was. The best thing about it is that Mick Jagger is in it,
right.
which is not saying much. Because that's 92. But then you get Main Offender and Wandering Spirit, and Main Offender, and both of them talk about hard, loud, big drum sounds, big guitar sounds, especially the Rick Rubin Wandering Spirit production for Mick. So I'm thinking of those as those are my backdrops for what Voodoo Lounge I thought was going to sound like. And then ultimately I felt like this is a little bit more mellow than I expected.
Interesting.
The first three tracks aside, and then I Go Wild, which kicks off side 2, or is it side 3?
It's side 3. Side
okay,
side
on the
yeah.
vinyl, but and then on cassette, I think I had a cassette.
Oh,
in addition to a CD. The Mean Disposition is not even on the cassette,
right. Mm-hmm.
So it just ends with Through and Through, which is an amazing. Like those 2 Keith tracks are 2 very unusual. Well, I wouldn't say the worst is unusual, but
Through and Through, definitely, I would say.
Through and Through is a very
powerhouse,
odd track that I'm so glad that it exists, because there's nothing else like that.
No, it's
recorded.
It's incredibly cinematic, that song. I think of it unfolding like a movie. It's just so mysterious, and it just unfolds slowly. And I think Voodoo Lounge at least gave us a lot of things, but 2 of Keith's strongest since the 70s easily. I would say you got The Worst is an absolute stone cold classic Keith song. Beautiful.
That's a gem. That's a timeless, that goes up there in the canon. Mm-hmm. And I think of Voodoo Lounge as I think of Keith having a peak of discovering all the open tunings and getting in 68, and then through 73 when he sort of bottoms out with heroin addiction. And to me, from 85, where he starts writing and singing for Dirty Work, and Steve Jordan discovers, hey, I want to produce this guy if he ever makes a solo album. I think from 85 through 90, through Voodoo Lounge, is a second peak for Keith Richards in his career. And it may even be his best overall. If you add his singing and his guitar playing, which I as a lead player, I think he was just as prodigious in terms of output. The Voodoo Lounge is the last real Keith burst, the real 50-50. Mick and Keith are both in the driver's seat. You can argue that Bridges to Babylon is that as well, but there's a wall that went up between them on that recording that did not exist on Voodoo Lounge. It was really, I think it was the last great 50-50 Stones album.
Absolutely. And like you said, and I've quoted a couple of times, the best Stones songs are the ones that
Keith starts and Mick finishes.
Hello.
That's the first 3.
Yeah.
All 3 of them are like that. They're Keith ideas, Keith melodies, Keith titles. In all 3 cases, those are his titles. And then Mick finishes the melody and the lyrics, and you get the magic. That's the magic. And what do you get when just Mick is writing? You get I Go Wild, and it's okay. It's okay.
I'm a big, my mantra for this album is that I'm a big fan of the performances on the album. I think every band member just comes through so beautifully in different parts of this album. And I Go Wild is a great one for Charlie. I love how Charlie sounds on there. And I agree. I really am a sucker for the Mick lyrics on that song, and he even says it's the wordy song of the album. I thought I had read this story, and I wanted to confirm it. I was glad that it was in Keith's book Life, where he's talking about this era that apparently one of their biggest arguments was during I Go Wild. Do you remember
Yeah.
this where
Yeah.
he was walking into the studio and Mick was just getting I Go Wild off the ground and he was playing that riff and
Imitation riffing, as Keith says.
the quote, there's only two guitar players in this band and you're not one of them.
You're not one of them. Yeah.
And it's true
Yeah.
because out of all the pseudo Keith riffs that Mick has borrowed, that
He's
one is like
good at it. Yeah.
yeah, he's pretty exactly. I mean, he did come up with Brown Sugar after all.
Yes, I know. And
But it's interesting that song brought things to a head because apparently that argument brought out all this drama. It's like, while we're already in this room, let's talk about other shit too.
everything. Yeah. Like, let's go back to Anita Pallenberg and the performance movie and all of that. Yeah. That's all their drama, which if you had to be around it as Ronnie or anybody else, you'd be like, oh, are we really doing this again? Seriously?
Yeah. And apparently Don was a great mediator for moments like that, which I'm sure they appreciated.
Yes. And I don't know how I feel about Don Was overall and what he did for them. I did think he probably gave them some fixed direction, kept them on track, and there's some great things that, like, I prefer his production on Bridges to Babylon over what Mick brought.
Mm-hmm.
Like How Can I Stop is an amazing sounding track.
Yeah.
Not just the writing of it and the performance is beautiful, but the sound of it is second to none. But I guess it's one thing that leaves me a little bit cold about Voodoo Lounge. It does feel a little bit toothless to me overall.
Mm.
For as great as the performances are. And the first three tracks, like you said, they're a gut punch. But then when you get that's the second half, the back half of it just feels a little flat to me.
Yeah, and look, I mean, because we're talking like, Brand New Car, Sweethearts Together, Suck on the Jugular, Blinded by Rainbows. And first I want to mention Brand New Car. When I was a youngster, I thought, oh, this song is very clever. It's got this double entendre. It's like an X-rated Chuck Berry song. It is.
Yes. And then you listen to it now and you're like, gosh, you're 50 something years old.
Right. Yeah. And the redeeming quality, I think, is like, I think that's Keith on the wah wah, which is like, oh, that's new,
kind of cool. Yeah.
Yeah. But you're right. I've also like the shine off that has kind of gone. And Sweethearts Together. I mean, Mick, I've read him talk about the song and he says that, oh, Keith came up with the premise of it. And he's like, oh, I love the way he says, he's like, to prevent the song from dissolving at the bottom of your cup of coffee because it was so saccharine and just so sweet sounding. I had to give it another twist, an edge to it. Like, oh, there's this pessimism to it. And I couldn't really pick up on that. To me, it always came off as a very lovey-dovey clouds thing.
I guess he's trying to make it sound not cynical, but a little bit world weary with lines like, life is never easy. It's never silky smooth. The pain and laughter, but we come together and it's all good. And that's not, I actually find that song kind of poignant. I like that one.
Okay.
I like the is it Flaco Jimenez?
Yep.
On accordion.
Yeah, great stuff.
Which is great stuff. Frankie Gavin, the fiddler on The Worst, beautiful. Ronnie's playing throughout. Pedal steel on The Worst, B Bender on Sparks Will Fly and I Go Wild. The slide, open tuning slide on You Got Me Rockin' and Out of Tears. I think he's got a lap steel on Baby Break It Down. There's a great little lap steel solo. So Ronnie really shines.
Yep.
Really, in a way that he did not later on Bridges to Babylon or Bigger Bang. I think he got sort of marginalized.
Right.
Maybe self-marginalized. But again, with being a peak for Keith Richards, I think as far as Ronnie Wood contributions, it was out of this world for Ronnie Wood. Uh, and
My
the title Out of Tears
mhm.
is an amazing Mick ballad. One of the best ballads he's ever written.
It's so funny because I think what I miss from a song like that, or um, maybe Streets of Love, but more so with Out of Tears, is that when you listen to the uh, demo of Out of Tears with Mick on the piano, um, it's such a small thing. I'm probably being too tedious, but like I missed when the Stones would play like their own piano instead of handing
Yep.
it off to Chuck,
Yep.
or a professional, and then it became this clean, professional sounding thing.
Yeah.
And Out of Tears, I think I miss a little bit more of a homey vibe, because when you hear Mick play that riff, which is what I think was what
Yeah.
gave birth to that song, it ties it together, brings it a little bit more personal. I could never connect with that song emotionally, although I love the choruses, but I find the verse to be a little bit, wobbly, just like the verses of Streets of Love. I was sad, I was bad.
Yeah. Yes. I think Out of Tears is far superior to Streets of Love.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
But yeah, Mick plays an okay piano, like
Yeah.
Memory Motel, but he's also buttressed by Keith's electric piano on Memory Motel.
Mm-hmm.
And then they both play nice little fills sometimes, like
Mm-hmm.
Faraway Eyes. The little I
Ah.
think that's Mick playing Floyd Kramer style Nashville piano fills. And Keith can give you some decent piano, but I like Chuck's playing on that track a lot. I mean, I think and
It's
what he
great.
did live on that tour
Mm-hmm.
was often, he would improv a little bit.
So,
Very
so,
good.
so Don was his contribution. You're still figuring that out. It's up in the air, like his presence and as a role producer.
Yeah, I guess I'm kind of torn. I like the album overall, but I do think that I don't know if Chris Kimsey would have been what would have I have no idea. It's not even worth speculating, but what would Rick Rubin have brought? If the album sounded more like Wandering Spirit as far as the way the instrumentation, everything sounded, but with Rick Rubin around, who knows interpersonally whether that would have worked. I can imagine Keith not being okay with a personality like Rick at all.
No,
Like, who is this guy? Who does he think he is?
but I would love to.
One thing that Don had in his favor is that he is a musician.
Yeah.
And and a good one, a solid one. Whereas Rick is just a listener. I don't even think he touches the knobs.
Mm.
So I don't know how that would have gone. People always talk about, well, bring Jack White in or bring this guy or that to work some kind of a miracle to bring back the magic of 1972. And it's like, that's not coming back. This is what we have is what we have.
You mentioned 1972 and people thinking that somehow they could go back to that. And Mick accuses Don Was of doing that to them on this album. He's like, Mick wanted to do all these other more out there, quote, groove songs, which if you follow all the bootlegs we mentioned, Residue, Voodoo Stew, you can hear those experiments.
Mick
and
was
apparently
going after that.
Yeah, Mick was trying to chase that, and Don was really trying to bring them to a very conservative place, so there's something to be said about that, where, I guess he was trying to have him say focus. And it apparently, according to Mick, it did sound like they were trying to get an Exile vibe. I don't know if they did. I can't hear that.
Sound anything like
No.
Exile. So I get what Mick is saying. Like, you're trying to bring back the vibe and the attack of classic Rolling Stones sound, but the album itself doesn't sound anything like the 70s at all.
No. My observation over the years, I think some people's knee-jerk reaction is that Voodoo Lounge is their worst album. Can you see that, or where people are coming from? I think it was. You tell me, were people even then, labeling it as too slick and too perfect sounding and loud and stuff?
I don't remember any of that.
Okay.
I don't think so. I remember. I mean, there was a lot of hype. It was still big on MTV. I mean, this MTV still paid attention to the band, so there was it got talked about. The Love is Strong video
Great
got a
video.
bit of airplay. It was a great video. Um, in terms of I think the album got mostly positive reviews, like they all sort of do.
Won a Grammy.
Yeah, which was kind of you've never gotten one, so or they got the Lifetime one in '86, which was a lifetime achievement, which they didn't take very serious at all. I think they accepted it remotely, and Charlie looked like he was completely wasted.
Oh yeah, right.
Which is sad.
Yeah.
So, and they were not in the building for Voodoo Lounge when they won that Grammy. I think they were on tour.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
South America, I want to say. 95, winter 95. Maybe.
I remember one interview where Ronnie reminds Charlie that they won a Grammy, and I think Charlie goes, "Oh, you got the Grammy?" And Ronnie goes, "Oh yeah, I got one. Didn't you get one?" So got lost in the mail.
Take that. I mean, Charlie was interviewed about Voodoo Lounge, and he's like, I think this was in VH1. He's like, I haven't listened to this one. It's still in the wrapper. Like,
as we wrap up here, your best song, your favorite, most favorite song on the album, and your least favorite.
I will say my least favorite is "Suck on the Jugular." It's not a terrible song. It just, I think what they were trying to do was like a hard funk. It sounds like soft funk. Again, It sounds toothless. I
know what you mean.
And then my favorite, gosh, man, that's tough.
I've got to get. I know what you're going to say. I know what you're going to say.
I bet you don't. What do you think I'm going to say?
I'll say it after you.
Sparks Will Fly.
That's exactly what I was going to guess.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've heard you talk about that song before, and it's. I know it's a special chemistry in that song, isn't there?
It's the two of them together. It's the yin and the yang, and that's what moves me.
That guitar break at the middle, like ba-da-da-da,
ba-da-da. Yeah,
that's so interesting. You know, it's like not a solo, but it's like a rhythmic solo.
I think of it as because there's an actual bridge that follows with vocals in it.
Right.
I had to get sniff around my old hunting ground.
Right.
But yeah, that's just a little instrumental. But he and Charlie are so locked in.
Yep.
That you could just listen to the two of them. Like I've said before, you don't even just the two of them together is the Stones.
Now, the best of the two albums here, Voodoo Lounge or It's Only Rock and Roll?
I'm going to go with Voodoo Lounge.
Nice. Okay. And lastly, Voodoo Lounge or Undercover?
I'm still going to go with Voodoo Lounge.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. And I do like this album a lot. I like it. I think it could have been really good. It was good, but it could have been even better if I was in charge.
Scott, this has been fun as usual. Why don't you tell people where to find your great work?
You can find me on YouTube under my name, Scott Galupo, or Keith Richards Riff Cousins, if you search for that.
Very good. Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, as always.